Experts couldn't repair an Apache helicopter until the Admiral brought a brilliant Air Force veteran. The $35 million war machine had crashed in flames, 2 pilots dead, top brass panicking, and every expert walking away. No one could fix it. No one, except a forgotten janitor, who used to be the military's most gifted engineer. But why did he fall from grace? And what dark secret does the wreckage still hide? As sabotage creeps from the shadows and powerful enemies close in, one man must battle not just metal and wires, but betrayal, lies, and a system that buried the truth. What if the one person who could save them is the same man they tried to destroy? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. Colonel Laura Caldwell strode through the Pentagon's well-worn corridors, her polished boots clicking against the floor tiles. The familiar scent of coffee and printer paper filled the air as she made her way to what she expected would be a standard briefing on overseas logistics. After 12 years of military service, these halls felt like a second home, even if her recent transfer still had her double-checking room numbers. She paused briefly to straighten her uniform jacket, catching a glimpse of her reflection in a darkened window. The same determined green eyes that had watched over countless missions stared back at her. Her auburn hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, every strand in place according to regulations. The silver oak leaves on her collar felt especially heavy today, reminding her of the responsibility she carried. As she approached Conference Room 2B, voices drifted through the partially open door. They weren't the usual tones of pre-meeting small talk. These were hushed, urgent, and intense. Laura slowed her steps, her intelligence training automatically kicking in. Something about those voices raised a red flag in her mind. She reached the door just as Defense Secretary Harrison Blackwood's voice cut through the others, sharp and commanding. "The specifications have to change. I don't care what it takes." Laura knocked firmly on the doorframe and stepped forward. The scene before her was unexpected. Secretary Blackwood stood at the head of the conference table, his tall frame leaning over scattered documents. 3 senior generals sat around him, their faces tight with concern. The conversation died instantly. Blackwood's cold blue eyes fixed on her, and his lip curled slightly. "Colonel, wait outside. This doesn't concern you." His tone dripped with dismissal, as if she were a junior clerk who had wandered into the wrong room. Laura felt her spine stiffen. In her 12 years of service, she'd faced down plenty of condescending superior officers, but something about Blackwood's tone set off alarm bells. She'd seen that look before, the look of someone who thought their rank made them untouchable. "Sir, I was scheduled for the 0900 logistics briefing in this room," she said, keeping her voice steady and professional. The 3 generals exchanged glances, and one of them quickly gathered up several papers from the table. "The briefing has been postponed," Blackwood said flatly. He straightened his expensive suit jacket, a gesture that seemed designed to emphasize the distance between his position and hers. "You'll be notified of the new time. Dismissed." Laura remained in the doorway for a moment longer than strictly necessary, her trained eye taking in every detail. The documents being hastily collected, the way one general wouldn't meet her gaze, the tension in the room that felt completely out of place for a simple schedule change. "Yes, sir," she finally responded, executing a precise about-face that would have made her drill sergeant proud. But as she walked away, her mind was already racing. In her experience, when high-ranking officials acted this defensive about a simple meeting, something was usually very wrong. She made her way to her office, her footsteps measured and calm despite the growing unease in her gut. The morning sun streamed through the narrow windows, casting long shadows across the corridor. Other officers passed by, nodding in greeting, unaware of the scene she'd just witnessed. Settling at her desk, Laura pulled up her computer calendar and checked the meeting details. The logistics briefing was still there, scheduled and confirmed. No cancellation notice, No postponement alert. She drummed her fingers on the desk, remembering the scattered papers the generals had been so quick to hide. The image of those documents nagged at her. In her years in military intelligence, she'd learned to trust her instincts. And right now, every instinct was telling her that something wasn't right. Blackwood's dismissive attitude wasn't just about rank or gender. He'd been protecting something. Laura glanced at the small picture frame on her desk, the one that held a photo of her old unit. 12 faces smiled back at her, including young Lieutenant Sarah Chen, her protege. All of them gone now, victims of equipment that should have protected them, but failed catastrophically instead. She straightened in her chair. Decision made. She hadn't been transferred to the Pentagon to ignore suspicious behavior, no matter how highly placed its source. If Secretary Blackwood thought he could dismiss her that easily, he didn't know Laura Caldwell very well. She'd faced down enemy fire. She could handle an arrogant bureaucrat. Opening a fresh document on her computer, she began typing out her observations from the morning's encounter, noting every detail while it was still fresh in her mind. The exact words used, the body language, the documents she'd glimpsed. In her experience, the smallest details often proved the most important. As she worked, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stumbled onto something much bigger than a postponed meeting. The question was, how far up did it go? And what would it cost to find out? Laura Caldwell's mind raced as she walked away from conference room 2B, her footsteps echoing in the Pentagon's corridor. She'd seen enough suspicious behavior in her intelligence career to know when something wasn't right. Instead of returning to her office, she made a quick decision. She circled back through a parallel hallway, her heart beating steadily as she approached the meeting room from a different angle. Years of field experience had taught her there was always a way to gather intelligence if you knew where to position yourself. The Pentagon's old ventilation system and thin walls had their advantages. Laura found a secluded spot in an adjacent maintenance alcove, partially hidden by a large potted plant. From here, she had a clear line to the meeting room's partially open door. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out her phone, activating its recording function, a habit she'd never lost from her intelligence days. Secretary Blackwood's voice carried clearly through the gap. Project Nightfall needs to move faster. The threat assessments have to support the specifications we've outlined. Sir, these numbers are difficult to justify, one of the generals responded, his voice heavy with concern. The intelligence reports don't support. The intelligence reports will say what we need them to say, Blackwood cut in sharply. Meridian Defense has already begun production based on our agreements. Laura's breath caught in her throat. Meridian Defense, Blackwood's former company, the one he'd supposedly cut all ties with before becoming defense secretary. She leaned closer, straining to catch every word. The procurement documents are ready, another general added, papers rustling in the background. But sir, if anyone looks closely at these threat assessments... No one will look closely, Blackwood's voice held absolute certainty. The only people with access to the full Project Nightfall documentation are in this room. The contracts will be split into smaller packages, routed through different departments. By the time anyone connects the dots, the deals will be done. Laura's training kicked in as she mentally recorded every detail. The way Blackwood emphasized certain words, the reluctance in the generals' voices, the sound of documents being passed around. Her phone captured it all, but her mind was already analyzing the implications. The initial $800 million package needs to be approved by Friday, Blackwood continued. The board at Meridian is expecting it. Remember, gentlemen, we all benefit when this goes smoothly. Your retirement portfolios will thank you. Laura felt her jaw tighten. She'd seen corruption before, but this was different. This wasn't just about money. This was about deliberately manipulating threat assessments to funnel massive military contracts to a specific company, the kind of corruption that put soldiers' lives at risk. What about Colonel Caldwell? One of the generals asked. She's been asking questions about the procurement patterns since she transferred in. The colonel is not a concern, Blackwood dismissed. She's been assigned to review logistics in the Pacific Theater. By the time she finishes that wild goose chase, everything will be in place. Besides, who's going to believe her over us? Laura's fingers pressed against her phone, making sure it was still recording. The arrogance in Blackwood's voice made her blood boil, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still. This was too important to risk detection. The next phase involves the modification of the threat assessment from the Southeast Asian sector, one of the generals said. We'll need to adjust the projected numbers to justify the increased procurement. Make it happen, Blackwood ordered. Meridian's new prototype matches exactly what we'll claim we need. Funny how that works, isn't it? His laugh was cold and sharp. Laura's mind flashed to her old unit, to the faces in that photograph on her desk. How many other units were at risk because of deals like this? How many soldiers would be sent into the field with equipment chosen not for its effectiveness, but for its profit margin? The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Laura remained motionless, her phone recording every damning word. They discussed shell companies, modified requisition forms, and ways to bury the paper trail. Project Nightfall, she realized, wasn't just a single corrupt contract. It was an entire system designed to funnel billions of dollars through manipulated defense contracts. Finally, chairs scraped against the floor inside the room. Laura quickly saved the recording and slipped her phone back into her pocket. She moved swiftly but silently away from her hiding spot, her mind already processing everything she'd heard. As she walked back through the Pentagon's corridors, her posture was perfect, her face composed. Anyone passing by would see only a colonel going about her duties. Inside, though, her thoughts were racing. She had evidence now, actual proof of corruption at the highest levels of the Defense Department. The magnitude of what she'd uncovered was staggering. Project Nightfall wasn't just about money. It was about compromising national security for profit, about betraying the very soldiers they were supposed to protect. And somehow, she, the colonel they'd dismissed so easily, was now the only one who knew the truth. Laura reached her office and closed the door quietly behind her. She pulled out her phone and stared at the recording icon, knowing that the file it contained could shake the Pentagon to its foundations. The question now wasn't whether to act, but how to proceed in a way that would ensure justice was served. Laura's fingers tightened around her phone as the conversation in the conference room grew more detailed. Through the gap in the door, Secretary Blackwood's voice carried with chilling clarity. The intelligence reports from Southeast Asia need significant adjustments, Blackwood said, shuffling papers. Current assessments show minimal threats, but Meridian's new Mark 7 weapon systems need a market. We'll modify the data to indicate immediate defensive requirements worth $450 million. One of the generals cleared his throat. Sir, fabricating intelligence at this scale? Let me be clear, Blackwood cut in sharply. The reports will show exactly what we need them to show. Your personal offshore account will show exactly what you need to see. Are we understanding each other, General? Laura's stomach churned as specific numbers began flowing. The corruption was far worse than she'd imagined. The first phase kickbacks will be distributed through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, another general explained. $2 million each, routed through 3 separate accounts to avoid detection. The larger payments will come after the second quarter deliveries. And the quality control reports? Someone asked. Blackwood's laugh was harsh. Already handled. We have people in the testing facilities who know how to make the numbers work. The Mark 7's actual performance doesn't matter. The paperwork will show it meets all requirements. Laura thought of her former unit, of the 12 soldiers she'd lost. How many other units were being sent into combat zones with equipment chosen for profit rather than performance? Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her phone's position to ensure clear recording. The current delivery schedule shows 3,000 units going to forward operating bases next month, one of the generals said. The failure rate in preliminary testing was 28%, but we've buried those results. Those soldiers signed up knowing the risks, Blackwood dismissed. Besides, by the time any problems surface, the money will be moved and the papers shredded. Our friends at Meridian have already guaranteed our board positions once we retire from service." Laura fought to keep her breathing steady as they delved into their network of collaborators. They named procurement officers, testing facility directors, even congressional staffers who were being paid to look the other way. "The beauty of Project Nightfall," Blackwood continued, "is its compartmentalization. Each department sees only their small piece. Logistics signs off on transport, intelligence provides the modified threat assessments, procurement processes the contracts in smaller packages. No one can see the whole picture." "Except us," someone added with a laugh. "The next shipment of supposedly battle-ready equipment is even worse," one general said. "Testing showed critical failures in extreme temperatures, but Meridian says fixing it would cut into profit margins. The paperwork shows they pass all specifications." "Those specifications were written specifically for Meridian's products," Blackwood explained. "Even their substandard equipment meets our carefully crafted requirements. The soldiers won't know the difference until they're in the field. By then, who can prove anything?" Laura's jaw clenched as they discussed specific units that would receive the faulty equipment. Combat teams, support groups, forward deployed forces, all of them being sent into harm's way with gear designed to maximize profit rather than protect lives. "The total value of Project Nightfall contracts will exceed $2 billion by year's end," Blackwood said with satisfaction. "Our friends at Meridian have already prepared the kickback schedule, 10% of the gross, divided among everyone in this room, plus the consulting contracts and board positions waiting for us after retirement." They proceeded to discuss their methods for hiding the money trail. Offshore accounts in 7 countries. Shell companies registered in places with strict privacy laws. Consulting firms that existed only on paper, ready to provide cover for massive payments. "The best part is that it's practically untraceable," one general boasted. "Every document is technically legal. Every specification is met, even if we wrote those specifications ourselves. Every threat assessment is officially filed, even if we manufactured the intelligence." Laura listened as they laid out delivery schedules for the next 6 months. Thousands of units of substandard equipment, all purchased at premium prices, all generating massive kickbacks for the men in that room. The scale of their betrayal was staggering. "Remember," Blackwood said as the meeting seemed to wind down, "everything about Project Nightfall stays in this room. The only copies of the real numbers, the actual test results, and the payment schedules are in these folders. Once the contracts are signed, these documents disappear." Laura's heart pounded as she realized what she had captured. Names, dates, dollar amounts, specific contracts, everything needed to expose the entire conspiracy. Her phone had recorded nearly 40 minutes of detailed evidence of corruption at the highest levels of military procurement. The conversation shifted to their next meeting, scheduled for Friday when the first major contract would be signed. Laura carefully backed away from her position, making sure her phone had saved every damning word. She moved silently through the Pentagon corridors, her mind racing with the weight of what she'd discovered. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about corruption. It was about deliberately betraying thousands of American soldiers, knowingly sending them into combat with equipment designed to fail. Also, a handful of men could profit from their positions of trust and authority. Laura's legs felt weak as she made her way to her office, the recorded evidence weighing heavily on her phone and her conscience. She collapsed into her chair, her mind racing with the enormity of what she'd just discovered. But as she began reviewing the contract numbers mentioned in the meeting, something caught her eye that made her blood run cold. The serial numbers, the manufacturing dates, the specific equipment models. They matched perfectly with the gear her unit had been using 8 months ago. "No," she whispered, her hands shaking as she pulled up the archived mission reports on her computer. "Please, no." The mission that had taken 12 of her soldiers had been blamed on equipment malfunction. At the time, it had been written off as unfortunate timing, bad luck in harsh conditions. But now, Laura's vision blurred as she remembered Lieutenant Danny Torres's last transmission. "Colonel, The targeting systems are completely dead. Nothing's responding like it should. We can't get a lock on the hostiles." Those had been his final words before the ambush claimed him, and 11 others. Danny had been more than just another officer under her command. He'd been her protege, the young lieutenant she'd personally mentored since his first day in the unit. She'd seen so much potential in him, had watched him grow from an eager rookie into a capable leader. The failure rate in preliminary testing was 28%, the general's words echoed in her mind. They had known. They had known the equipment would fail, and they'd sent it out anyway. Laura opened her desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. It showed her and Danny at his promotion ceremony, both smiling proudly at the camera. He'd been so young, just 26 years old, with a brilliant career ahead of him. His wife Maria had been 6 months pregnant when he died. The soldiers won't know the difference until they're in the field. By then, who can prove anything? Blackwood's callous words twisted like a knife in her gut. She remembered standing at 12 funerals, looking into the eyes of 12 families, telling them their loved ones had died serving their country. She'd believed it then, believed it was the noble sacrifice that sometimes came with military service. But it hadn't been noble at all. It had been murder for profit. Laura's hands clenched into fists as she recalled that fatal mission. The unit had reported problems with their equipment during the pre-mission check, but the brass had insisted everything was within specifications. Danny had voiced concerns about the targeting systems, but the paperwork showed all tests had been passed. Those specifications were written specifically for Meridian's products, Blackwood had said in the meeting. Even their substandard equipment meets our carefully crafted requirements. The memories flooded back with painful clarity. The frantic radio calls as their equipment failed one piece at a time. The desperate attempts to maintain contact as the unit was surrounded. Danny's final transmission, cut short by enemy fire. She'd blamed herself for months afterward. Should she have pushed harder about the equipment concerns? Should she have delayed the mission until everything could be double-checked? But now she understood. No amount of checking would have helped. The entire system had been rigged from the start. Laura pulled up the casualty report from that day, forcing herself to read through it again. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, age 31, 2 children. Corporal Sarah Rodriguez, age 24, newly married. Private First Class. James Wilson, age 19, had joined the unit just 3 months before. The list went on, each name a life cut short by greed. And Danny. Lieutenant Daniel Torres, whose baby daughter would never know her father, who had trusted the system, trusted his equipment, trusted that his country wouldn't send him into battle with tools designed to fail. Those soldiers signed up knowing the risks Blackwood had dismissed so casually. But they hadn't known the real risks. They hadn't known they were being betrayed by the very people meant to support them. They hadn't known their lives were being traded for kickbacks and consulting contracts. Laura looked again at the photo of Danny, remembering how he'd always said, "We do this job because someone has to stand up for what's right." He'd believed in the system, believed in the mission, believed in the fundamental honor of military service. The recording on her phone suddenly felt heavier. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was 12 lives cut short. It was Danny's daughter growing up without a father. It was families destroyed and futures stolen, all to line the pockets of corrupt officials. Her hands stopped shaking. The initial shock and grief were transforming into something else, a cold, focused anger. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. This wasn't just about following leads and gathering evidence. This was about justice. This was about honoring Danny's memory and ensuring no other soldiers would be betrayed the way her unit had been. Laura carefully secured the recording, making multiple encrypted copies. Then she began methodically organizing everything she knew about Project Nightfall, every detail she'd overheard. She would need it all to bring down Blackwood and his conspirators. "I'm going to make this right, Danny," she whispered to the photograph. "Whatever it takes, I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. I promise you that." The click of expensive shoes on polished floor tiles made Laura freeze. She quickly tucked away the photograph of Danny and straightened up, but before she could move away from the meeting room door, it swung open violently. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Defense Secretary Blackwood's cold voice cut through the air. His tall frame filled the doorway, flanked by 3 stern-faced generals, his icy blue eyes fixed on Laura with predatory intensity. Laura's military training kicked in as she snapped to attention. "Mr. Secretary, I was just—" "Save it, Colonel." Blackwood cut her off, his voice dripping with contempt. "General Phillips here noticed your shadow under the door. How long were you standing there?" Laura maintained her composure, meeting his gaze steadily. "Sir, I was waiting for the briefing, as scheduled." General Matthews, a stocky man with graying temples, stepped forward. "Cut the act, Caldwell. We know you were eavesdropping. The question is, what exactly did you hear?" The corridor suddenly felt much smaller as the 4 men moved to surround her. Laura fought the instinct to back away, keeping her spine straight and her expression neutral. "Let's take this somewhere more private," Blackwood said, gesturing toward a nearby conference room. It wasn't a suggestion. Once inside, Blackwood closed the door and turned to face her. His earlier contempt had transformed into something more dangerous, calculated malice. "Colonel Caldwell, let me be very clear about your situation," he began, his voice deceptively smooth. "Whatever you think you heard today was a classified discussion regarding national security matters far above your pay grade. Any attempt to discuss or report on what you may have overheard would constitute a serious breach of national security." Laura felt her jaw tighten. "With all due respect, sir, I don't believe discussions about kickbacks and deliberately faulty equipment fall under national security classifications." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. General Roberts, the youngest of the 3 generals, slammed his hand on the conference table. "Watch your mouth, Colonel. You're treading on very dangerous ground." Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. "You seem to be laboring under the delusion that you have some sort of leverage here. Let me disabuse you of that notion." He began pacing slowly around the table. "I have friends in every branch of government, Colonel. The Joint Chiefs, Congress, the intelligence community, they all owe me favors. One phone call from me, and your distinguished military career becomes a cautionary tale." "You're threatening me, Mr. Secretary." Laura kept her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. "Threatening? No, I'm educating you." Blackwood stopped directly in front of her. 25 years of service, isn't it? That's quite a pension to throw away, not to mention the possibility of criminal charges for breaching national security protocols. General Matthews leaned forward. "Be smart about this, Caldwell. You've got a good thing going here at the Pentagon. Nice office, prestigious position. Would be a shame to throw it all away over a misunderstanding." Laura thought of Danny's face, of the 11 other soldiers who had died because of these men's greed. Her fear began to transform into cold anger. "And let's not forget," Blackwood continued, "accidents happen all the time in war zones. I understand you're still qualified for field duty. There are plenty of dangerous assignments where unfortunate incidents occur." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Laura looked at each man in turn, the generals she had once respected, the civilian leader who had sworn to serve his country. All she saw now were corrupt men drunk on power and greed. "I have connections too, Mr. Secretary," Laura said quietly. "People who would be very interested in learning how their sons and daughters are being sent into combat with deliberately defective equipment." Blackwood's face darkened. "You stupid woman. Do you really think anyone would believe you over me? I could have you declared mentally unfit for duty before you could even file a report. Or perhaps we'll discover evidence of corruption in your own procurement history. It would be tragic. Another senior officer caught with her hand in the cookie jar." "The media," Laura began, but General Roberts cut her off with a harsh laugh. "The media? Who do you think owns them? Who do you think they'll believe? A decorated defense secretary or a disgraced officer making wild accusations. Blackwood stepped closer, towering over her. This is your one and only warning, Colonel. Keep your mouth shut, continue your duties as assigned, and you get to keep your career and your pension. Push this any further, and I promise you'll regret it for whatever remains of your life. Are we clear? Laura stood her ground, looking directly into his cold eyes. She thought of Danny's last transmission, of his wife Maria, of his daughter who would grow up without a father. She thought of 11 other families who deserved to know the truth. Crystal clear, Mr. Secretary, she replied, her voice steady. Good. Blackwood straightened his expensive suit jacket. I'm glad we understand each other. You're dismissed, Colonel. I suggest you take the rest of the day to reflect on our conversation. The four men watched as Laura left the conference room, their eyes boring into her back. She could feel the weight of their threats following her down the corridor, but her steps didn't falter. They had made their position clear, but they had no idea what they were dealing with. They had just threatened the wrong officer. Laura's hand rested on the conference room door handle, but she didn't leave. Instead, she turned back to face her would-be intimidators, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The four men stared at her, confusion replacing their previous smugness. Is there something else, Colonel? Blackwood asked, his tone carrying a warning edge. Actually, yes, Mr. Secretary. Laura reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out an official document bearing the Inspector General's seal. I believe there's something you gentlemen need to see. General Matthews squinted at the paper. What is this? This, Laura said, laying the document on the conference table, is my official authorization from the Inspector General's office. You see, my transfer to the Pentagon wasn't exactly routine. The color drained from Blackwood's face as he snatched up the document. His hands trembled slightly as he read, his earlier confidence evaporating with each line. 3 months ago, Laura continued, her voice steady and clear, the Inspector General noticed suspicious patterns in military procurement contracts, particularly those connected to Blackwood Defense Solutions. She watched as the Defense Secretary's jaw clenched. He granted me emergency investigative powers to look into these irregularities. Quite thoroughly, I might add. General Roberts stepped forward, his face red with anger. You're bluffing. This has to be fake. Laura pulled out her phone and tapped the screen a few times. Would you like to call the Inspector General yourself? I have him on speed dial, though he's probably quite busy right now considering what I just sent him. Sent him? Blackwood's voice cracked slightly. Oh, yes. Laura's green eyes hardened. Everything you discussed in that meeting room, every word about the kickbacks, the fabricated threat assessments, the substandard equipment, it's all been recorded and transmitted to multiple secure locations. The FBI has a copy. So does the military prosecutor's office. The generals exchanged panicked looks. General Phillips collapsed into a chair, his face ashen. You can't do this, Blackwood sputtered, his earlier threats forgotten. I have connections. Your connections won't help you now, Laura cut him off. The evidence is already in the system. Your phone calls would only add obstruction of justice to the charges. She walked slowly around the table, noting how the men who had tried to intimidate her minutes ago now seemed to shrink away from her presence. You know what the interesting thing is? Laura continued, her voice taking on an edge of steel. This investigation started as a simple financial audit, but then I discovered something that made it personal. She pulled out the photograph of Danny Torres and placed it on the table. Lieutenant Daniel Torres, 28 years old, killed in action when his squad's equipment failed during a routine patrol. 11 other soldiers died with him that day. The room fell silent except for General Matthews' ragged breathing. That faulty equipment came from one of your rushed contracts, Mr. Secretary, the same contracts you were just bragging about profiting from. Laura's voice remained calm, but her eyes blazed. Danny was under my command. He was my responsibility, and you sent him to his death to line your pockets. Blackwood slumped against the wall, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him. "Colonel, perhaps we can work something out?" Laura finished for him. "Make a deal? That's not going to happen. The investigation is complete, the evidence is secure, and there's nothing you can do to stop what's coming." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. Laura glanced at the screen and smiled. "Right on schedule. FBI agents are entering the building now. Military police are securing the exits. Your offices are being sealed as we speak." The sound of multiple footsteps in the corridor confirmed her words. Blackwood made a move toward the other door, but Laura's voice stopped him. "I wouldn't, Mr. Secretary. Attempting to flee will only make things worse for you." She walked to the main door and opened it, revealing several FBI agents and MPS in the hallway. "Though honestly, I'm not sure how much worse it can get. The evidence we have is absolutely damning." The agents entered the room, their faces grim and professional. Laura watched as the 4 men who had threatened her just minutes ago were read their rights and placed under arrest. The handcuffs clicked shut around Blackwood's wrists with a satisfying finality. As they were led away, Laura called out one last time, "Mr. Secretary?" Blackwood turned, his face a mask of defeat. "You were right about one thing. This was about national security, just not in the way you meant." She stood in the doorway, watching as the men were escorted down the corridor. Her hand brushed against Danny's photograph in her pocket. The investigation was over, but its impact was just beginning. Dozens of corrupt contracts would be exposed, countless lives would be saved from faulty equipment, and most importantly, the families of 12 fallen soldiers would finally know the truth about why their loved ones died. Laura had done what she'd sworn to do when she first put on the uniform: protect her fellow soldiers and serve her country with honor. And no amount of threats or intimidation could have stopped her from seeing it through. Blackwood's eyes darted to the conference room phone, a desperate calculation visible on his face. Before Laura could react, he lunged forward and slammed the speaker button, punching in a 4-digit code. "Security Detail Alpha, Emergency Protocol 773, Conference Room B, West Wing. Detain Colonel Caldwell immediately. She's compromised classified information." His voice cracked with barely controlled panic. Laura's military training kicked in instantly. She assessed the room in seconds. 2 doors, 12-foot ceilings, heavy conference table in the center. The main entrance would soon be blocked by incoming security. The side door led to a maze of corridors she knew well from her weeks of investigation. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Secretary," Laura said, already moving toward the side exit. "The evidence is already transmitted. This will only add charges." "Stop her!" Blackwood shouted at the generals, but they remained frozen, unwilling to physically engage a fellow officer. Laura reached the side door just as heavy footsteps thundered in the main corridor. She slipped through, closing it firmly behind her. The Pentagon's familiar beige walls and fluorescent lighting took on a menacing quality as she heard Blackwood barking orders through the door. "She has classified materials. Detain her by any means necessary." Laura moved swiftly but methodically through the corridors, her combat boots silent on the polished floors. Her mind raced through the building's layout. The security team would try to cut off all exits. They'd expect her to head for the nearest stairwell. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed from multiple directions. Through a side window, she glimpsed 3 armed security officers running parallel to her position in the outer corridor. Their black tactical gear stood in stark contrast to the Pentagon's ordinary office environment. "Target spotted, B-Wing corridor," a voice crackled over their radios. "Moving east." Laura ducked into an empty office just as 2 more security officers rounded the corner ahead. Her heart pounded, but her hands remained steady as she pulled out her phone. The screen confirmed her worst fear. No signal. They were blocking communications. "Check every room!" The order echoed through the hallway. "She's armed and dangerous!" Laura almost laughed at that last part. She carried only a standard-issue sidearm, which she couldn't use against security personnel without facing serious charges. They were trying to paint her as a threat to justify whatever happened next. The office door handle rattled. Laura moved silently behind it as it swung open. A security officer entered, weapon drawn. She waited until he was fully inside, then used the door itself as a weapon, slamming it hard against him. He stumbled forward, and Laura executed a precise strike to the back of his neck, just enough force to disorient without causing serious injury. The officer's radio crackled. "Jensen, report status." Laura grabbed the radio from the dazed officer's belt. She couldn't risk him calling for backup. The corridor outside was momentarily clear. She moved quickly, heading away from the main security positions. 2 more officers appeared at the far end of the hallway. "Stop right there, Colonel." Instead of stopping, Laura accelerated. She'd spent weeks memorizing the Pentagon's layout during her investigation. The officers raised their weapons, but she'd already turned the corner, using the building's angular design to her advantage. "All units converge on Section 11. Do not let her reach the outer ring." Laura's mind flashed to Danny Torres and the 11 other soldiers who died because of Blackwood's corruption. Their faces drove her forward. She couldn't let their deaths be for nothing. The sound of boots on marble grew closer. Laura spotted a maintenance access door, the kind usually ignored by everyone except cleaning staff. She pulled out her security badge, praying her investigative authority extended to this area. The light turned green. She slipped inside just as 3 more officers ran past. The maintenance corridor was narrow and dimly lit. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and the air smelled of cleaning supplies. Laura moved quickly but carefully, knowing this passage ran parallel to the main corridor. She could hear muffled shouts and running feet through the walls. "Check the maintenance access. All doors!" Laura picked up her pace. The passage would emerge near the building's outer ring. If she could reach it, she might find a way to break through the communication blackout. Ahead, she heard a door open. Light spilled into the passage as security entered from the other end. Laura looked up at the pipes overhead, then jumped, grabbing them with both hands. Her muscles strained as she held herself above the corridor. 2 officers moved beneath her, weapons ready. "Clear ahead." "Roger that. Moving to Section 12. Laura waited until their footsteps faded before dropping silently back to the floor. Her arms ached, but adrenaline kept her moving. The passage ended at another maintenance door. Through its small window, she could see the outer ring corridor and 4 security officers guarding it. Her options were running out. The net was tightening, and Blackwood's security team was coordinating with disturbing efficiency. They weren't just trying to detain her anymore. They were hunting her. Laura pressed herself against the wall, controlling her breathing despite the exertion. She could hear more security teams converging on her position. The evidence was secure, transmitted to multiple agencies before Blackwood's team could block communications. But that wouldn't matter if she couldn't make it out to confirm the transmission and testify about what she'd witnessed. The maintenance door's handle began to turn. Laura tensed, ready to fight if necessary. Everything she'd worked for, everything Danny and his fellow soldiers died for, hung in the balance. The door opened slowly, flooding the dark passage with fluorescent light. The maintenance door swung open, flooding the dark passage with harsh fluorescent light. Laura dropped and rolled as a security officer swept his flashlight beam through the space where she'd been standing. In one fluid motion, she came up behind him, using his own momentum to push him forward into the wall. The impact wasn't hard enough to seriously hurt him, but it gave her the seconds she needed. She burst through the door into the outer ring corridor, startling the 4 guards stationed there. Their delayed reaction told her they were regular Pentagon security, not the specialized team Blackwood had called in. Laura used that split-second advantage, charging straight at them instead of running away as they expected. "Stand down, Colonel!" one shouted, reaching for his weapon. Laura didn't break stride. She'd fought in closer quarters during her combat tours. The first guard moved to block her path, but she ducked under his grasp, driving her shoulder into his midsection. He stumbled backward into his colleague, creating momentary chaos. The other 2 guards hesitated, unwilling to draw weapons inside the Pentagon against a senior officer. The recording device felt heavy in her pocket as she spun past them. Every impact, every sudden movement reminded her of its presence. That small piece of electronics carried the proof that could bring down Blackwood's entire operation. She couldn't let it be captured. "All units, target moving through outer ring, sector 12. The radio call echoed through multiple devices, creating a disorienting chorus. Laura's boots squeaked on the polished floor as she rounded the corner at full speed. Ahead, she saw 2 more security teams converging from opposite directions. Behind her, the guards she'd evaded were recovering and giving chase. The corridor had become a trap. Without slowing, she shoulder-checked the nearest office door. It burst open, revealing a startled civilian worker at his desk. "Sorry," Laura called as she cut through the office, vaulting over a chair and heading for the connecting door she knew would lead to the adjacent room. "Ma'am, you can't—" The worker started to protest, but Laura was already through the next door. She emerged into another corridor just as Blackwood's voice boomed over the building's PA system. "Security alert in all sectors. Colonel Laura Caldwell is to be detained immediately. She is in possession of classified materials and poses a security risk." "Like hell I do," Laura muttered, checking her options. The recording device felt warm in her pocket, or maybe that was just her imagination. She'd protected sensitive intelligence materials under enemy fire. She wasn't about to lose this evidence to a corrupt bureaucrat's private security force. Heavy boots thundered on the marble floor behind her. Laura glanced back to see 4 members of Blackwood's tactical team, their black gear stark against the Pentagon's institutional walls. They moved with military precision. These weren't regular security guards, but specially trained operators. Laura spotted a stairwell ahead. The tactical team would expect her to go down, trying to reach ground level. Instead, she burst through the door and went up, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Her combat training had prepared her for exactly this kind of sustained exertion. "Target moving up stairwell 7! The call went out over their radios. Laura reached the next floor and exploded through the door, immediately cutting left instead of right, again doing the unexpected. She heard the stairwell door slam open behind her as her pursuers followed. Their boots created a rhythm of controlled urgency. They were trying to pace themselves, expecting a long chase. The corridor ahead was empty, but Laura knew it wouldn't last. She needed to break their line of sight. A cleaning cart stood abandoned near a row of offices. Laura grabbed it and swung it behind her, sending it crashing toward her pursuers. They had to break formation to avoid it, buying her precious seconds. She rounded another corner and saw what she needed, a bank of elevators. One set of doors was just closing. Laura lunged forward, slipping through the narrowing gap. Inside, a startled junior officer snapped to attention. "Ma'am, At ease, Lieutenant," Laura said, hitting the button for 2 floors down. "This elevator is now part of a security operation." The doors opened 2 floors below, and Laura immediately crossed to the opposite bank of elevators, catching one going up. She could hear the tactical team coordinating on their radios, trying to predict her movements. But they'd have to split their forces now, unsure which elevator she'd taken or in which direction. She exited on the upper floor and moved quickly but calmly toward one of the Pentagon's many internal courtyards. The recording device remained secure. She patted her pocket, feeling its reassuring presence. The evidence it contained would expose Blackwood's corruption and bring justice for Danny Torres and his fallen comrades. A voice called out behind her, "Colonel Caldwell!" Laura turned to see 2 of Blackwood's security officers approaching from both directions, cutting off the corridor. They moved cautiously, hands near their weapons. "Stand down, Colonel. Secretary Blackwood just wants to discuss the situation." "I bet he does," Laura replied, backing toward the courtyard door. "Did he tell you why he wants this discussion? Did he mention the kickbacks? The defective equipment getting soldiers killed?" She saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. They were Pentagon security, sworn to protect the building and its personnel. Blackwood had probably fed them some story about classified materials, but Laura's words made them hesitate. "Don't make this worse than it is," one officer said, but his tone had lost its edge. Laura's back hit the courtyard door. "I'm trying to make it better," she said, then pushed through into the open air. The courtyard was empty, its precisely maintained grass and paths deserted during the security alert. Laura moved quickly along the building's inner wall, staying close to the shadows. She could hear radio chatter and running feet from multiple directions as Blackwood's security teams tried to coordinate their pursuit. The recording device remained secure in her pocket, its weight a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. Every step took her closer to getting the evidence out, to exposing the corruption that had cost so many lives. She wasn't just running from Blackwood's security, she was running toward justice. Laura pressed herself against the cold marble wall of the courtyard, calculating her next move. The sound of boots echoed from multiple directions, making it difficult to determine the safest path. Her fingers brushed against the recording device in her pocket, reminding her of everything at stake. A shadow fell across the grass to her left. Laura tensed, ready to run, when a familiar voice whispered from behind a column. "Colonel Caldwell, over here!" Laura's head snapped towards the voice. General Patricia Hennessy stood partially concealed behind one of the courtyard's massive support columns. Laura's mind flashed back to the meeting room, where she'd seen Hennessy sitting among the conspirators, nodding along with Blackwood's corrupt plans. "Stay back," Laura warned, shifting into a defensive stance. "You were in that room with them." Hennessy raised both hands, showing they were empty. "I'm not your enemy, Colonel. I'm the one who requested your transfer to the Pentagon." Laura blinked, trying to process this information while keeping track of the approaching security teams. "What are you talking about?" "I've been working undercover with the Inspector General's office for the past 8 months, Hennessy explained, her voice low and urgent. "We needed someone with your specific background, military intelligence, combat experience, and most importantly, a personal connection to the equipment failures." The pieces started falling into place in Laura's mind. "You knew about Lieutenant Torres?" Hennessy nodded solemnly. "Your unit wasn't the only one affected by Blackwood's schemes. I discovered the pattern of corruption 6 months ago, but I needed to gather more evidence. That's why I embedded myself with them, pretending to be part of their conspiracy while documenting everything." Laura studied the general's face, her intelligence training kicking in to assess the truth of these claims. "Prove it. Check your secure email. Authorization code Sierra 7 Delta 94. You'll find my initial report to the Inspector General from 3 months ago, outlining the whole operation." Laura pulled out her phone, keeping one eye on their surroundings as she quickly accessed her encrypted military email. The code matched, revealing a detailed document that confirmed everything Hennessy was saying. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Laura demanded, though she already suspected the answer. "We needed your genuine reaction in that meeting room," Hennessy explained. "If you'd known I was undercover, you might have given something away. Blackwood is extremely paranoid. He watches everyone for the slightest sign of disloyalty." The sound of running feet grew closer. Hennessy quickly moved to Laura's side, speaking rapidly but clearly. "I've been feeding them false information while gathering evidence against them. The recording you made today is the final piece we needed. Their own words confirming the kickback scheme and their knowledge of the equipment failures." "Ma'am!" a voice called from across the courtyard. More of Blackwood's security team had spotted them. Hennessy straightened to her full height, immediately assuming the commanding presence of a general officer. "Stand down," she ordered in a voice that carried across the open space. "Colonel Caldwell is operating under my direct authority as part of an ongoing Inspector General investigation." The security team hesitated, clearly confused by the conflicting orders from a general versus the defense secretary. "But Secretary Blackwood said," one of them began. "Secretary Blackwood is currently the subject of a federal corruption investigation," Hennessy cut him off. Any orders he's given regarding Colonel Caldwell are hereby countermanded by my authority and that of the Inspector General's office." Laura watched as the security team exchanged uncertain looks. Hennessy's confident tone and clear command presence were having an effect, but she could see they were still torn between contradicting orders. "Your oath is to the Constitution and the United States military," Hennessy reminded them firmly. "Not to any individual, regardless of their position. Make your choice carefully, because what happens in the next few minutes will be recorded in official testimony." The security team's leader slowly lowered his weapon. "Yes, ma'am," he said, then turned to his team. "Stand down. The general has command." Hennessy nodded approvingly, then turned to Laura. "Colonel, we need to get that recording to the secure evidence room immediately. I have agents from the Inspector General's office standing by." "Blackwood will try to stop us," Laura warned, remembering the Defense Secretary's earlier threats. "Let him try," Hennessy replied with grim satisfaction. "I've spent months documenting every illegal order, every corrupt deal, every piece of evidence that proves what they've done. Your recording is the final nail in their coffin, proof that they knowingly sent defective equipment to our troops." Laura felt a surge of emotion as she thought about Danny Torres and the other soldiers who had died because of Blackwood's greed. "They're going to pay for what they did?" "Every last one of them," Hennessy confirmed. "We have enough evidence to ensure full prosecution. No deals, no quiet resignations, no golden parachutes. They betrayed their oaths and cost soldiers their lives. They'll face the full consequences of those actions." The sound of more approaching security teams echoed through the courtyard. Hennessy gestured toward a side entrance. "This way. I have a secure route to the evidence room. Once that recording is properly logged and copied, there's nothing Blackwood can do to stop what's coming." Laura fell into step beside the general, noting how the older woman moved with the same purposeful efficiency she'd observed in the meeting room. Only now she understood it wasn't in service of corruption, but justice. "Thank you," Laura said quietly as they moved through the door. "For everything you've done to expose this." Hennessy's expression softened slightly. "When I discovered what they were doing, I thought about every soldier under my command throughout my career. Every young man and woman who trusted us to provide them with the equipment they needed to do their jobs and come home safely. Blackwood and his conspirators betrayed that trust for profit. That's unforgivable." They moved quickly through the corridors, Hennessy's presence and authority clearing their path. Laura felt the weight of the recording device in her pocket, no longer a burden, but a promise of justice about to be fulfilled. Hennessy led Laura through a series of maintenance corridors, their footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. The general moved with purpose, clearly familiar with every turn and doorway in this lesser-known part of the Pentagon. "The building's security system is controlled from a central command post," Hennessy explained, swiping her access card at a secured door. "As part of my undercover work, I made sure to maintain oversight of security protocols. Blackwood never questioned it. He was too focused on the money to pay attention to administrative details." Laura followed closely, her mind already working through tactical possibilities. "What kind of control do we have?" "Everything," Hennessy replied with a hint of satisfaction. "Door locks, surveillance cameras, communication systems. More importantly, I have the authority to initiate security lockdown procedures." They emerged into a small room filled with monitors showing different sections of the Pentagon. Two security officers stood at attention when they entered, clearly recognizing Hennessy's authority. "Lieutenant Chen, initiate Security Protocol Delta 7, Hennessy ordered. Authorization code Victor Echo 982. The younger officer's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Yes, ma'am. Protocol Delta 7 activated." Laura watched as multiple screens showed heavy security doors sliding into place throughout the building. "We're sealing them in?" "Better than that," Hennessy said, moving to another console. "We're controlling exactly where they can go. Lieutenant Rodriguez, bring up the location of Secretary Blackwood's security detail." The second officer quickly pulled up a map showing multiple red dots moving through the corridors. "They've split into 3 teams, ma'am," Main group is with Secretary Blackwood, heading toward the north exit. Perfect, Hennessy nodded. Initiate selective door control. Guide them toward Conference Room 4, Charlie. Laura understood the strategy immediately. We're herding them. Like sheep, Hennessy confirmed. That conference room has only one exit, and it's designed for secure briefings. Once they're inside, we can lock it down completely. They watched as Blackwood's group encountered their first blocked exit. The security cameras showed their confusion as they tried another route, only to find it similarly sealed. Each time they attempted a new path, more doors closed behind them, leaving only one direction available, straight toward the trap. Ma'am, Lieutenant Chen called out. The other two security teams are trying to converge on the secretary's position. Not today, Hennessy said firmly. Colonel Caldwell, would you like to do the honors? Laura stepped forward, studying the building schematic. Close sections 7 and 12. Force Team 2 down the east corridor and Team 3 towards the south briefing rooms. Keep them separated. The lieutenants executed her commands precisely. On the monitors, they could see the frustrated security teams realizing they were being systematically cut off from their leader. Blackwood's group is approaching 4 Charlie now, Rodriguez reported. Laura watched as the defense secretary and his immediate security detail entered the conference room, probably thinking they could use it to regroup and communicate with their scattered forces. The moment they were inside, Hennessy gave the order. Seal it. Full lockdown. The heavy doors closed with a decisive thud that was visible even on the security feed. Blackwood's face showed dawning comprehension as he realized what had happened. They watched him grab his phone, probably trying to call for help. I've disabled all communications in and out of that room, Chen reported. They're completely isolated. Well done, Hennessy said, then turned to Laura. Colonel, I believe it's time to make some calls of our own. Would you like to contact the FBI, or should I? Let's do it together, Laura replied, pulling out her phone. The more official channels documenting this, the better. Over the next 20 minutes, they coordinated with multiple agencies. FBI agents who had been standing by based on Hennessy's earlier alerts began arriving at the Pentagon. Military police units under Hennessy's direct command secured the scattered security teams. Through it all, they watched Blackwood becoming increasingly agitated in his improvised prison, realizing that his authority and connections couldn't help him escape. Look at him, Laura said, watching the defense secretary pace the conference room like a caged animal. He's not used to being the one trapped by the system. That's the thing about corruption, Hennessy observed. People like Blackwood think they can use the system for their own benefit without being bound by it. They forget that the same protocols and chains of command they abuse can be turned against them when properly applied. Laura thought about Danny Torres and the other soldiers who had died because of Blackwood's greed. He never thought he'd face consequences, did he? Men like him never do, Hennessy agreed. They surround themselves with people who follow orders without question, forgetting that true military discipline isn't about blind obedience. It's about upholding principles and protecting those under our command. The room's door opened as a senior FBI agent entered, accompanied by 2 military prosecutors from the Judge Advocate General's office. Hennessy greeted them with professional efficiency, quickly bringing them up to speed on the situation. We have Secretary Blackwood and 3 of his primary conspirators contained in Conference Room 4 Charlie, she explained. Colonel Caldwell has audio recordings of their explicit discussions regarding the corrupt contracts and kickback schemes. I have 8 months of documented evidence supporting the investigation. The FBI agent nodded approvingly. This is excellent work, General. We'll take it from here. Would you like to accompany us for the arrest? Hennessy glanced at Laura. Colonel Caldwell should be there. She's the one who risked everything to get the final evidence we needed. Together they walked through the now secured corridors toward Conference Room 4, Charlie. Laura felt a profound sense of justice as they approached, knowing that behind those doors sat the men responsible for so much unnecessary death and suffering. Ready? Hennessy asked quietly as the FBI agents prepared to enter. Laura thought about Danny Torres's face about his family, about all the families who had lost loved ones to faulty equipment. "More than ready, ma'am." The doors opened, and they stepped forward together. Two women who had used the very system Blackwood tried to corrupt to bring him down. In that moment, Laura understood that true power didn't come from authority or rank. It came from using that authority to protect others and uphold the principles they had sworn to defend. The main conference room of the Pentagon's E-Ring held a different atmosphere now. Gone were the frantic chases and desperate escapes. In their place was the steady, methodical execution of justice. Colonel Laura Caldwell stood at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture perfect, her uniform immaculate. Before her sat the men who had betrayed their country and their fellow soldiers, Defense Secretary Harrison Blackwood and his 3 co-conspirators. FBI agents lined the walls while military police stood at attention near each exit. General Hennessy positioned herself strategically near the door, a silent reminder that the Pentagon's legitimate authority now controlled this space. Laura opened a leather portfolio containing multiple documents, each one carefully prepared and officially sealed. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. She wanted these men to feel every second of their downfall. "Defense Secretary Harrison Blackwood," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I am authorized by the United States Department of Justice and the Office of the Inspector General to execute these federal warrants for your arrest." Blackwood's face reddened. "This is absurd. Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes, sir, I do." Laura's tone remained professional as she lifted the first document. "You are the architect of Project Nightfall, a criminal conspiracy that diverted $742 million in defense contracts to Blackwood Defense Solutions, your former company, through falsified threat assessments and fabricated intelligence reports." She placed a thick folder of documents in front of him. "This contains complete documentation of 37 separate fraudulent contracts, including your personal signatures and dated recordings of your instructions to subordinates." Moving to the first general, Laura continued her systematic dismantling of the conspiracy. "General Marcus Phillips, you are hereby relieved of duty and stripped of your security clearances, effective immediately." She placed another warrant before him. "This details your acceptance of $4.2 million in kickbacks, laundered through offshore accounts that you believed were untraceable." The general's face went pale as she laid out bank statements and transaction records. Each piece of evidence had been meticulously gathered and verified. "General William Hastings," Laura turned to the next conspirator. "You are charged with multiple counts of conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States government." She placed his warrant alongside documented proof of his involvement. "Your role in falsifying equipment testing reports directly resulted in the deployment of substandard gear to active combat zones." Laura paused, her voice taking on an edge of controlled anger. "That equipment failure led to the deaths of 27 American soldiers, including 12 from my former unit." The room fell silent as the weight of those deaths hung in the air. Laura moved to the final general, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. "General Thomas Reynolds, you are charged with treason against the United States." She placed his warrant before him. "Your deliberate manipulation of intelligence reports to justify unnecessary weapons purchases constitutes a direct betrayal of national security." Blackwood attempted to regain control of the situation. "These accusations are groundless. My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers have already been contacted," Laura interrupted, producing another document. "This is a detailed confession from your primary legal counsel, outlining his role in concealing the paper trail of your kickback schemes. He's agreed to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors." General Hennessy stepped forward. "Military police, please take the generals into custody. They will be transported to separate holding facilities pending court-martial proceedings." As MPs moved to secure the generals, Laura focused her full attention on Blackwood. "Mr. Secretary, you are no longer authorized to access any Department of Defense facilities or information. Your security clearances are permanently revoked." She nodded to the FBI agents. Secretary Blackwood is now in federal custody on charges of treason, fraud, conspiracy, and criminal negligence resulting in death. "You can't do this," Blackwood sputtered as agents approached. "I have connections. I'll make calls." "Your phones have been confiscated," Laura stated flatly. "Your assets are frozen. Your contacts in Washington have already distanced themselves from you. The evidence is overwhelming and public. There will be no deals, no arrangements, no diplomatic solutions." She stepped closer, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "Lieutenant Daniel Torres was 26 years old when your faulty equipment got him killed. He had a family, dreams, and a lifetime of service ahead of him. Remember his name, Mr. Secretary. Remember all their names. You'll have plenty of time to think about them where you're going." The FBI agents secured Blackwood in handcuffs as Laura turned to address the room. "Let the record show that at 1000 hours on this date, pursuant to federal warrants and military authority, the following actions have been executed. Defense Secretary Harrison Blackwood is removed from office and placed under arrest. Generals Phillips, Hastings, and Reynolds are stripped of rank and detained for court-martial proceedings." She continued with precise documentation. "All security clearances are permanently revoked. All access to military facilities and information systems is terminated. All communications privileges are suspended pending full investigation and trial." General Hennessy stepped forward. "Colonel Caldwell, do you require anything further?" "No, ma'am." Laura gathered her documents. "The Inspector General's office has everything needed to proceed with prosecution. The FBI has custody of all civilian suspects. Military justice will handle the court-martials." They watched as the conspirators were led away in handcuffs, their power and influence stripped away, leaving only the cold reality of their crimes. The conference room, which had so recently been a place of corruption and conspiracy, now stood as a testament to the triumph of military justice over personal greed. Laura looked down at the arrest warrants, each one representing months of investigation and years of hidden crimes. The system these men had tried to corrupt had ultimately brought them down. More importantly, the soldiers they had betrayed would finally receive the justice they deserved. The room gradually emptied as agents and officers escorted the prisoners out. Laura remained at the conference table, methodically organizing the evidence that would ensure these men never again betrayed the trust of American soldiers. Each document represented a piece of the truth she had fought to uncover. Each warrant a step toward accountability for those who had abused their power. Laura Caldwell sat in her Pentagon office, surrounded by stacks of files that represented months of painstaking investigation. Each folder revealed new layers of corruption that extended far beyond Blackwood and his immediate circle. Her computer screen displayed a complex web of connections linking defense contractors, government officials, and international shell companies. "The numbers are staggering," she said to General Hennessy, who stood reviewing the latest financial report. $1,412,000,000 diverted through fake contracts over 7 years. Hennessy nodded grimly. "And that's just what we've uncovered so far. The forensic accountants are still tracking money through offshore accounts." Laura pulled up a detailed spreadsheet. "We've identified 37 defense contractors involved in the scheme. 15 of them were shell companies that existed only on paper." She pointed to specific entries. These companies submitted inflated bids to make legitimate contractors look reasonable by comparison. Then Blackwood would award contracts to his preferred vendors at grossly inflated prices. "The kickbacks were distributed through a network of consulting firms," Hennessy added, picking up another file. "Each one claiming to provide strategic analysis or market research that never actually existed." The investigation had revealed a sprawling web of corruption. Mid-level bureaucrats had been paid to falsify inspection reports. Military officials had accepted bribes to overlook failed equipment tests. Contract officers had been threatened or bought off to push through suspicious purchases without proper review. Laura opened a drawer and retrieved a worn photograph of Lieutenant Torres with his family. 216 soldiers died because of faulty equipment from these contracts. Not just my unit, units across every branch of service. Each death representing a family destroyed by corporate greed. We've frozen $1.8 billion in assets so far, Hennessy reported. The Justice Department is moving to seize everything connected to the conspiracy. Properties, investments, overseas accounts. All of it will be liquidated. Laura pulled out another file, this one containing details about the victims and their families. The compensation plan is ready. Each family will receive $2 million, tax-free. It won't bring back their loved ones, but it will provide some security. She paused on a particular page. Maria Torres and her daughter Emily will be among the first to receive payment. Danny's death exposed critical flaws in the body armor that Blackwood's company supplied. The investigation might never have started without that. The office door opened, and FBI Special Agent Carter entered, carrying additional files. Colonel, we've identified 53 more government officials involved in the conspiracy. 28 from Defense, 15 from State Department, and 10 from various oversight committees. Political appointees? Hennessy asked. Most of them, Carter confirmed, all positioned to help cover up the scheme. We're executing search warrants across Washington right now. The evidence we recovered from Blackwood's devices gave us everything we needed. Laura studied the growing list of conspirators. Any of them talking? All of them, Carter said with a grim smile. They're falling over themselves to make deals. Each confession leads to 3 more conspirators. The whole house of cards is coming down. Hennessy reviewed the latest numbers. The restitution fund will reach $2 billion once all assets are seized and liquidated. That's enough to fully compensate every family and still fund a complete overhaul of our procurement system. We're also implementing new oversight protocols, Laura added. Independent testing of all combat equipment, multiple layers of review for contracts, direct channels for soldiers to report equipment failures without fear of retaliation. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the Pentagon courtyard. The hardest part was visiting the families, telling them their loved ones didn't die because of enemy action or the fortunes of war. They died because people they trusted valued profit over their lives. The Torres family meeting was particularly difficult, she continued. Emily is only 7 years old. She asked me if the bad men who hurt her daddy were going to jail. I promised her they would never hurt another soldier again. Agent Carter placed a final report on the desk. The first round of compensation payments will go out next week. We've established a dedicated office to help families navigate the process. Financial advisors, counselors, whatever support they need. Laura nodded. Maria Torres plans to use part of the money to establish a scholarship fund in Danny's name for children of fallen soldiers who want to attend college. She's turning this tragedy into something that will help others. That's not all, Hennessy added. Congress is fast-tracking legislation to strengthen oversight of defense contracts. They're calling it the Torres Act. His death may end up saving countless other lives by preventing this from happening again. The 3 of them spent the next hour reviewing additional files, each one revealing new aspects of the conspiracy. The corruption had spread like a cancer through the defense establishment, but its exposure was leading to real reform. The investigation continues, Carter said, gathering his files. But the core conspiracy is broken. Blackwood and his inner circle will spend the rest of their lives in prison. Their collaborators are falling like dominoes. Most importantly, the system that allowed this to happen is being rebuilt from the ground up. Laura picked up the photo of Torres and his family again. Danny used to say that serving in uniform meant being part of something bigger than yourself. He believed in the system, even when it failed him. Now we've made that system worthy of his sacrifice. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her office as they continued working, methodically documenting every aspect of the conspiracy. The task was far from complete, but the machinery of justice was now fully engaged. For every family that had lost a loved one to corporate greed, there would be accountability, restitution, and lasting change. The files on her desk represented more than just an investigation. They were a promise kept, to Torres, to his family, and to every soldier who had placed their trust in a system that was finally being purged of corruption. The price had been paid in blood, but the result would be a stronger, more accountable military that truly served those who served their country. Laura sat in the Pentagon's main conference room, her heart pounding as she faced the assembled military leadership. The room buzzed with anticipation as the Joint Chiefs of Staff gathered for what they had termed a special recognition ceremony. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off the polished brass and silver decorations that adorned the distinguished officers' uniforms. General Hennessy stood at the podium, her presence commanding attention from everyone in the room. Today, we recognize not just individual courage, but a watershed moment in military accountability, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. Colonel Laura Caldwell's actions have exposed one of the most significant corruption cases in Pentagon history. Laura's mind drifted to the past months of intense investigation and prosecution. 37 corrupt officials had been arrested. 15 companies had been barred from future military contracts. $1.8 billion in stolen funds had been recovered. But more importantly, 216 families would receive justice and compensation for their losses. Colonel Caldwell demonstrated exceptional valor, Hennessy continued, not just in confronting armed opposition, but in standing firm against institutional pressure and threats to her career. She exemplified the highest traditions of military service by putting the lives of our soldiers above personal safety and advancement. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs stepped forward, holding a small box. Colonel Caldwell's actions have forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about oversight and accountability within our procurement systems. Her investigation has already led to sweeping reforms in how we evaluate and award defense contracts. Laura's thoughts turned to Lieutenant Torres's widow, Maria, and their daughter, Sophia. Just yesterday, she had personally delivered the news that the family would receive full compensation and benefits. The tears in Maria's eyes and Sophia's tight hug had meant more than any official recognition ever could. "It is therefore my privilege," the chairman announced, "to promote Colonel Laura Caldwell to the rank of Brigadier General, effective immediately." The room erupted in applause as Laura rose and walked to the podium. General Hennessy removed Laura's colonel insignia and replaced them with the single star of a brigadier general. The weight of the new stars felt both foreign and right on her shoulders. Furthermore, the chairman continued once the applause died down, in recognition of Brigadier General Caldwell's unique qualifications and demonstrated commitment to integrity, we are establishing the Pentagon's new Office of Procurement, Integrity, and Oversight. General Caldwell will serve as its first director. Laura stepped to the podium, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Thank you for this honor and responsibility. But the real recognition belongs to the 216 service members who lost their lives due to corrupt practices, and to their families who have endured unimaginable loss." She paused, making eye contact with various officers in the room. This new office represents more than just oversight. It represents our commitment to never again allow greed and corruption to endanger our military personnel. We owe our service members nothing less than absolute integrity in every decision that affects their safety and mission readiness. The chairman handed Laura a formal document outlining her new role. The Office of Procurement, Integrity, and Oversight would have unprecedented authority to investigate suspicious contracts, audit procurement decisions, and protect whistleblowers who reported corruption. It would report directly to the Joint Chiefs, ensuring independence from political pressure. "Your first priority," General Hennessy explained after the ceremony as they walked through the Pentagon's corridors, "will be to implement the new safeguards we've developed based on your investigation. Every defense contract will now undergo multiple layers of independent review." Laura nodded, already thinking about staffing and procedures. "We'll need a team of forensic accountants, military procurement experts, and investigators with backgrounds in both intelligence and law enforcement." "You'll have whatever resources you need," Hennessy assured her. The Joint Chiefs understand that the cost of oversight is nothing compared to the cost of corruption, both in dollars and lives. They reached Laura's new office, a spacious corner suite that reflected her expanded responsibilities. On the wall hung a memorial plaque listing the names of the 216 service members who had died due to faulty equipment. Below it sat a framed photo of Lieutenant Torres and his unit. "This promotion isn't just about recognition," Laura said quietly, touching the plaque. "It's about responsibility, about making sure no other commander has to write letters to families explaining why their loved ones aren't coming home." General Hennessy squeezed her shoulder. "You've already changed the system, Laura. Now you have the authority to ensure those changes become permanent." Laura moved to her desk, where folders containing the first cases for her new office already waited. She opened the top file and began reading, ready to continue her mission of protecting those who served. The single star on her shoulder represented not just personal achievement, but a solemn commitment to uphold the trust of every service member who depended on the integrity of their leadership. Her new position would allow her to implement systemic changes, mandatory transparency in bidding processes, enhanced testing protocols for equipment, protected channels for reporting irregularities, and swift investigation of any suspicious patterns. The office would serve as both watchdog and advocate, ensuring that military procurement served its true purpose, supporting and protecting America's service members. The autumn breeze rustled through Arlington National Cemetery, sending golden leaves dancing between the endless rows of white headstones. Laura Caldwell walked purposefully through the sacred grounds, her polished general's stars catching the late afternoon sunlight. She carried a small bouquet of white roses and had removed one of her stars, holding it carefully in her hand. The path to Lieutenant Daniel Torres's grave was familiar. She had walked it many times over the past year. But today felt different. Today she could finally bring him the news she had promised at his funeral, that those responsible for his death would face justice. She found his headstone exactly as she remembered it. The white marble gleamed in the fading light, his name and dates carved with military precision. Laura knelt before it, carefully arranging the roses against the stone. "Hello, Danny," she said softly, running her fingers over the engraved letters. "I know it's been a while since my last visit. I've been busy keeping a promise, the one I made to you and the others." Her voice caught slightly as memories of Torres flooded back, his ready smile, his natural leadership ability, his dedication to his fellow soldiers. "You should have been here to see it, Danny. We caught them, all of them. The corrupt officials, the contractors who cut corners, everyone who put profit above soldiers' lives." Laura paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Your death wasn't meaningless. You and the others, your sacrifice exposed a cancer that was eating away at the system meant to protect our soldiers. Because of you, because of what happened to your unit, we've completely overhauled how we handle military contracts and equipment procurement." She reached out and touched the cold marble again. "Maria and Sophia will be taken care of. All the families will. We recovered the stolen funds, and there's a compensation program in place. Sophia's college education is guaranteed. I know it doesn't bring you back, but I wanted you to know that your family will be okay." Laura removed her remaining general's star and held both pieces in her palm, studying them in the fading light. "They promoted me, Danny, made me a general." She laughed softly. "You always said I'd make general someday, remember?" "Said I was too stubborn not to." With gentle reverence, she placed one of her stars at the base of his headstone. "This belongs to you as much as it does to me. Everything I did, every system I changed, every corrupt official I brought down, it started because of you, because you deserved better, because every soldier deserves better." The setting sun cast long shadows across the cemetery as Laura stood, brushing grass from her uniform. "I'm leading a new office now, making sure nothing like this ever happens again. Your death brought change, Danny, real change, the kind that saves lives." She stepped back, rendering a crisp salute to her fallen protege. The star gleamed against the white marble, a small but powerful symbol of justice served and promises kept. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.